Three rather strange things have happened to me in the past few weeks. The first I shared a few weeks ago with some of you here in the sanctuary and online, when I thought my son's little black cat with green mosaic eyes had made a journey all the way home, all the way from her new home in Tottenham to Golders Green, where she'd been staying temporarily with me for 2 weeks. The appearance of an identical black cat with green eyes in my front garden just a few days after their move and her instantaneous disappearance made me think that what I had seen was only an illusion, or perhaps some expression of a longing for a connection with something unseen, disclosed only in moments of heightened perception and awareness. Not long afterwards, my son Ben and I went to see Leopoldstadt, Tom Stoppard's play about the fate of an assimilated Viennese Jewish family at the turn of the 20th century. Set against the social and intellectual background of fin de siècle Vienna, its opening scenes and dialogue summon up Stefan Zweig's world of yesterday, the golden age of security, with everything built to last, the state itself, the ultimate guarantor of durability, intermingled with conversations about love, marriage, and children. The characters' dialogue ranges over discussions about Mahler and Freud, Riemann's mathematical theory, and a growing perception that the seeming permanence of this era of security is what Zweig describes as a thin veneer through which the destructive forces of the underworld can break at any moment. Yes, in some ways, the play presents set pieces on the intelligence of that era, assimilation and anti-Semitism, Zionism, and the creation of Israel. But its trajectory across the first 55 years of the 20th century shows how those destructive forces did break through and destroy a whole family, and all but eradicate the Jewish identity of its only survivors. Some weeks before seeing the play, I had the privilege of meeting two of the actors, one a member of the LJS, and as I listened in to their conversation about the experience of preparing for the production, I was made aware of the disquieting questions and curiosity it had raised about these actors' own identities, about Jewish faith, practice, and culture, the culture they had both inherited, but in radically different ways. But that must be for another time, another sermon. To return to my story, I knew that one of the actors had a relatively small part, but on the train traveling up to the theatre, I cannot really call it a premonition, more a passing thought or some kind of apprehension, that that night she would be playing a lead role. I gave it no more thought, but arriving at the theatre, encountered the actor's sister, who greeted me with the words, "My sister has the lead role tonight." Two vague intuitions do not turn me into a stargazer, but then just under 2 weeks ago, I woke one morning in the midst of a vivid dream that my daughter had given birth to her first child, and within 24 hours, the child who was not expected for another few days had indeed arrived. My daughter and her husband had become parents, and I, who somehow knew it, before it had been communicated to me, had become a grandmother, a savta to a little granddaughter. These were the unknowable joys of opportunity and life that in some way came to me before I could even have known about them, and for all the pleasure they gave me, at the same time, I was left with a sense that this uncanny way of apprehending the future could also be the source of an unwelcome foreboding and fear. What if there were other kinds of intuitions or signs? Would I really want to know about the events they would foretell? Would I not rather remain ignorant, without the sense of suspicion or impending catastrophe? In a few moments, we will listen to the famous medieval Piyut religious poem that is associated with these days of repentance. Tane Tokef. Let us proclaim the holiness of this day, introduces into its words a note of Norah va'ayom, fear and dread. Here we see God anthropomorphized as a king, sitting on his throne of judgment, writing and sealing the fate of all his creatures in the book of life as they pass before him like sheep, or some say like soldiers passing muster. Our fate is held in God's hands, says the poem, and we, God's creatures, stand trembling in fear of how we will be judged. In our own mahzor, the most deterministic and unsettling part of the poem has been removed for reasons which I imagine are obvious. And yet, rereading them as I prepared the PowerPoints for our services, this omitted passage seemed of such immediate relevance to our own time that I toyed seriously with the idea of putting it back where it belongs. Here is the part of the poem that is left out, occurring just after the verse which speaks of God decreeing the destiny of every living creature's life. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed, for all who pass away and all who are born, for all who live and all who die, for those who complete their normal span and those who do not, who perish by fire or water, by the violence of man or the beast, by hunger or thirst, by disaster, plague, or execution, for those who rest and those who wander, for the secure and the tormented, for those who become poor and those who become rich, for the failures and the famous. It stays out of our liturgy because of its bleak determinism, because it foreshadows a darkness that we would rather not think about at the beginning of a new year. And yet, of what does it speak? It speaks of the fate of the world, of human life. It tells us something about the reality of the world in which we live, of birth and death, of lives cut off before they reach their full span, of fire and flood, of war and natural disaster, of plague and pandemics, of resilience and mental fragility, poverty and wealth, celebrity and anonymity, of those who suffer in pain, vulnerable to the turbulent winds of fortune. Is there not a truth in these words? When we recite them, do we not see in them a mirror held up to the world we live in, a world that is still shaken by the terrible events of 9/11 20 years ago, and the fate of women and girls left behind in Afghanistan, whose future will be decreed by a register of half the population who happen to be female, to be kept by the Taliban? Do we not see how our own actions have ravaged the beauty and delicate ecosystems of the environment? How the divisions in the world are not illusions, but are real ruptures that divide us one from another and create massive inequality and injustice. Why would we remove this likeness of our lives from our mahzor? Because we don't want to face up to its reality, because its deterministic tone is alien to our theology as liberal Jews, because the idea of a powerful and transcendent God who knows and foresees all no longer speaks to us in our secular and disillusioned minds. And yet, we cannot ignore the inevitable march of human life. There is, says Rabbi Karin D. Kedar, an ordained path of our lives, the stuff that happens beyond our power to know and control. And this, she says, is fate. While destiny is something different, it is how we respond to the things that happen to us and that happen in the world. We can choose to live, she says, with intention, choose the company we keep, choose to make our lives a great learning of the mind and spirit through consideration, introspection, dialogue, perseverance. We cannot control what happens to us. We absolutely can control our reaction to what happens. This is the dance of fate and destiny, the very essence of the human condition. Our life is not judged by events, but by our reaction to them. Our character and good name are formed from the fortitude, tenacity, and courage that it takes to live an elevated life. That teaching is summed up by Akiva in Pirkei Avot, Hakol tzafui v'harashut natuna. Everything is foreseen, yet free will is given. And Rabbi Hanina's Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz mi yira shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, except for the fear of heaven. It is this essential paradox at the heart of human life that teaches us that although we cannot necessarily change the courses of our lives and what happens to us, it is in our power to respond in ways that we choose. The Unatane Tokef poem reworks Akiva's and Hanina's sayings into this juxtaposition of verses that speak of the omniscience of God and fate and our freedom to choose our own destinies with its words, Uteshuvah, utefillah, utzdaka, mavirin et roa hagazera, but repentance, prayer, and good deeds annul the severity of the judgment. The beginning of this new year coincides with the arrival of hundreds of Afghani refugees in this country, 400 of whom arrived at the Metropole Hotel in Edgware Road over this past weekend. Local communities, including our own, have been asked to offer pastoral, religious, and practical support for as long as they remain in Westminster, which is likely to be months. As a synagogue, we have a long history of supporting refugees and now asylum seekers in this country. And we have a group of experienced volunteers who have not been able to run our drop-in for people seeking asylum over the past 18 months. Yesterday, Rabbi Igor and I attended a meeting of local religious and community organizations arranged by Westminster Council, who are coordinating help for families who've arrived with only the clothes and inadequate footwear they are standing up in. Families and individuals have been uprooted from their home and have left everything behind. They need clothes and footwear, baby formula and nappies, SIM cards for phones so that they can keep in touch with relatives and friends in Afghanistan. All of this will be coordinated by Westminster Council, and we can help. We can choose to be part of this team that alters the future for these families and their children, and that will bring about change in our own lives as well. I don't know if my glimpse of that little black cat was reality or an illusion, whether the thought I had on a Victoria Line train was simply a coincidence or a premonition, or whether my dream about a birth was simply the subconscious working through of my anxieties and expectations, or a glimpse into what the future might hold. Our future is not determined by our fate. It is rather shaped by the destiny we choose for ourselves: teshuvah, repentance, return to purposeful and meaningful existence; tefillah, gratitude and thanksgiving for the blessings of our lives; and tzedakah, our concern and passion for justice, our awareness that other people newly arrived in this country may need our help and experience. Although the past year has been difficult for all of us, let it not stop us from learning how to retrain our spirits to counter defeat and fear, so that we can reach out to find courage and hope for ourselves and for all those whom we seek to encounter and help in our daily lives. I wish you all a healthy and peaceful new year of 5782, and urge you to be in touch so that we can share our own blessings with those who are strangers to this country. Hein Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.